Welcome to the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast, offering tips, insights, and advice from the best in the publishing industry.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of All Things Book Marketing. I'm your host, Olivia McCoy, and our special guest today is David Wolf, the founder of Audivita. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, Olivia. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would love for you to start with what does Audivita do and how do you help authors?
So our company works with publishing companies, publishing services providers, and directly with authors to help them create the audio version of a manuscript that's been published already, is soon to be published. And so we make it easy. That's the way we approach the process. We produce about 200 audiobooks a year, so we've got systematic approach to all of this. And really, again, our sort of North Star about all of this, Olivia, is to make it easy and demystify the process for authors and sometimes for publishers who have no experience in audio, which is, as you know, a fairly specific type of skill set. So.
Oh, definitely. It's writing a book and then producing an audiobook version of that book. Very different skill sets.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about why it's important to have an audiobook at all. I mean, we covered this a couple years back on our podcast, but then since then, audiobooks have really just taken off into the stratosphere. So let's talk about why maybe that is. Why are audiobooks so big now? And then is it a requirement nowadays for authors to have one? I would say yes.
Well, I have said, this is beautiful space. I have said that really for any content creator, not participating in audio is leaving a lot of opportunity to unlock new listeners, new readers that would not otherwise experience your content at all. And what we've observed is I've been in this space for about 12, 15 years now. And the audiobook side of publishing is the fastest growing part of digital publishing, surprisingly, even more than ebooks. And so why is this happening? Well, I think there's been with hypermobile, that's driving a lot of it. I think you might argue, well, we're about even on the fiction and nonfiction side. So I don't know that we could argue that one side is favoring audio more than another. But I would say that people are just shifting their behaviors and they like to multitask. They like to take the book with them. They have become used to and accustomed to processing information and content using audio rather than reading. It's a preference for some people who consume content, whereas others like to sit and read because it's another experience. Many like to multitask, be walking the dog, doing their chores, whatever it may be, and experiencing a narrative or a business book or what have you in fiction or nonfiction. So it's a behavioral shift to audio, and we're experiencing this on both sides of our business. As you know, we also are podcast producers, and so there's just a lot of participation in consuming and this behavioral shift. So that's I think there's also a scarcity of time perception too. People don't feel like they have time to sit and read in a way that maybe they did at one point. And so this evolution of the market from books on tape, which were cumbersome relative to what we do now, where you can just simply stream the apps all remember where you are. There's a convenience factor here as well that just makes it really easy to stay with the book, stay with the narrative, even if you pause and come back to it. All of these things are just a part of it. It's technology's driving a lot of it, and the behavioral shift that kind of went in tandem with that technology.
And I do feel like audiobook technology is growing at a rate that far surpasses ebooks. We found that ebook technology kind of stagnated back in the early 2010s, whereas audiobook technology now we see Spotify taking off with audiobooks. We see all of this new digital version of an audiobook and all of this new technology and processes to help an author create their own audiobook as opposed to finding an audiobook publisher and then going straight through them and having them kind of take over for you. Now the author can have much more of a hand in producing.
Yes, that's a hot button for us too, because I think we were one of the first companies, I'm not sure about this, but I know we were early to the market with an author is the voice of their brand. They are the connectivity to market and their audience, particularly if they're appearing as a speaker, as a podcaster, guests on other people's podcasts, it makes sense for their voice to be conveying if they're capable of it. Now, doing 200 audiobooks a year, of which about 60, 70% is author read with a producer there working and coaching them in a virtual studio. That's the way we work. We don't just set an author loose and hope that they get it right, because it needs to be a guided experience, particularly if the author's not used to reading aloud and dealing with that intimacy that comes with audio into someone's earbuds, a one-to-one relationship. They're used to speaking and working in a room. It's a very different kind of delivery and performance style. So we like to guide our authors through. But back to my original point, a lot of the publishers really dissuading their authors to do it because you're not a professional voiceover. And so I would always argue, well, unless they're really not able to fluidly read at a certain threshold, they should do this because they are the brand. They're their voice brand. So it's been wildly successful, Olivia. We've done hundreds of these, and we have a very lucky, because we have producers that understand that when we're doing this, it's the author, the client, and the talent all rolled into one person on the other end. And so there's this delicate sort of emotional intelligence that has to go with producing an author reading their own that is very particular. You mentioned Spotify. I listened to an interview recently with the founder of Spotify, and the way they're thinking about this, and they're clearly leading the industry in a lot of ways, is that the lines between podcast and audiobook content may be blurring on the horizon, which is a fascinating notion. For in our business, they're fairly segmented. The distribution model is different, the way audiobooks are consumed and where they're bought and consumed, but Spotify is doing this, which is fascinating. So
I'm so glad you brought up narration, because it used to be a bit of a point of contention whether or not narrators should be the author themselves. And it still is. It sounds like a little bit with publishers,
right.
but it used to be a very, very hot take for me to say, I actually prefer when the author narrates their audiobook. And it's exactly what you were saying. It was a lack of training and a lack of support in teaching them how to go about it. I have found I really prefer nonfiction to be narrated by the author because they're used to talking about it. They know how to pronounce everything. They kind of have their sound bites already in their head from talking about it so frequently, especially because a lot of them are educators as well. So they're speaking on it all the time. And then I found it was about 50-50 for fiction, because is the author brave enough to do the voices? Can they do all the fun little intricacies that go into making it entertaining audio? That is a little bit of a different skill set. And I do think with support like what Audivita offers, then absolutely love it if the author is able to do that. But I'm a little more flexible in having a professional do that one as well. Do you think that that's something you see?
Yeah, we do see that. I mean, really, so much in novels and fiction work require the actor chops that are just required to deliver it in a way that's going to take the listener experience, the listener on a journey through those characters, through the scenarios, through the scenes, through the narrative. It requires a certain level of performance that most authors probably don't have. I'll just say it like that. And there are exceptions to all of this. On the nonfiction side, even memoirs and emotionally charged subject matter, like the mother of an autistic child or someone who was a Navy SEAL at war. We've done books like that, and although they're not business books and they're not necessarily directly educating with academic material, they're experiential, and the emotions that come with those emotionally charged experiences do translate to the performance. It's a delicate operation. In the case of the Navy SEAL I mentioned, I mean, he had to take frequent breaks because of the trauma that went with the experience. He's reliving his experience. Another woman who wrote a whole book about her very difficult divorce. Had to do the chapters out of sequence because they were so difficult for her to read and re-experience as the author. But that tells you that something emotionally is happening during the recording sessions that an actor just couldn't capture in the way that they did. So
yeah, that's beautiful. That's a really good point. Let's talk about the time and resources it takes to produce an audiobook. It used to be true that you had to go into a physical location to record. Is that still the case?
No, it's not the case. And our model is almost entirely virtual. So we're using technology that records studio quality through the internet. It does what's called local recording. So it actually records and captures the audio on the local computer of the client side, and then it's uploaded systematically to the cloud, where we then take it into post-production. So the technology has enabled us to have virtual studios, so we drop ship a microphone to the author, if they will take the author read side, because that's really what we're focused on in the moment. And we schedule typically a series of 90-minute recording sessions. We found that that's a sweet spot. It's not too much, it's not too little. The energy is even throughout all of the recording sessions. We get about an hour, on average, about an hour of final audio from a 90-minute recording session with an author, on average, some more, some less. The scheduling for us is very fluid. So it's not like you're block booking 4 to 8 hours in a recording studio and your energy does this, or, there's not this, if an hour is enough for today, an hour is enough for today. So it's very much like the podcast market, the way that's evolved, where it's all almost entirely done remotely, although there are some studio setups with the advent of video now coming in. There is video there with the producer. So while he's working with the author. So we have a team of 3 or 4 producers now that work on this. And again, the sensitivity about all that. So it's a series of 90-minute sessions, and you take your word count and you divide it by about 9,000 words, and then you get, this is what the running time will be. And that tells you about how many recording sessions you'll have. So you'll go through all these sessions with the producer, retakes, outtakes, all of the things that go with production. Then we'll submit it to we'll assign an editor to do the audio editing, the first pass. He'll return with a punch list of lines we need to do. We call them pickups. So we'll have a subsequent, after the edit, session with the author to stitch in any lines that need to be re-recorded for whatever reason. And you asked about studio environment, which I didn't directly answer that. I kind of took off into other places. So we have a pre-production meeting at the very beginning of our process, where we assess the acoustic environment that the author will be in. If they're in a room with a lot of glass, a lot of hard surfaces, a lot of echo, the bathroom effect, that's going to be problematic for post-production, although we do have software that can de-reverb a lot of stuff and really clean up a lot of it. Ideally, we want the source recordings to be as dry acoustically as possible. So we'll guide and work with the author on how to set up their mic, where to set it up in their home or home office or office. We've dealt with a spectrum of all kinds of environments, from Midtown Manhattan with a window open and you can hear every siren, to ideally, you just want to go into your walk-in closet in your house, because it's a great sound booth. It's got clothing all around you. It's absorbing all the sound. All you require is the microphone that we recommend, or drop ship, or if you have a podcast mic, that's fine. Plug and play. You're reading your manuscript from the screen. PDF. Our producer has a PDF. They're annotating as you go through. Oh, pick it up there, Olivia. You've stumbled over that line. Let's just start at the top of that paragraph, type of thing. And that's the way the process works. And then we stitch it all together into this seamless performance. So typically it takes about 8 to 12 weeks for the average book, 30 to 65,000 word range for a nonfiction book. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I have actually seen a lot of authors on TikTok who are curled up in their closet with their computer. Absolutely. And they're like, listen, yeah. I know, right. But the recording acoustics are so good in here. So that's not surprising.
I mean, nobody's going to care nobody's going to care where you were sitting or where you were parked when you were doing the recording. You just want it to sound good. So, again, and there are certain situations where the author just doesn't have the ability to, for whatever reason, and we adapt. The technology has gotten so good at magically removing a room tone, which is really the reason we talk about a closet, right? Because you want to strip the room out of it as much as you can going into the microphone. We just want their voice. So there's that. And then from a performance standpoint, sometimes it takes a little while for the author to warm up into the process. There's mic proximity that we coach them on, and staying on mic and staying focused. This is a very different process than just addressing a room. The energy is different. It's a much more focused, intimate type of art. And this from podcasting, which is a very intimate, like radio type of experience, right? So it's just you telling the story, if you like, to the producer. It really helps to have that producer there, because they are the receptor of the content and they can help guide this. We don't want to change who they are. Again, we want to lean into who they are, because that's the connectivity to market, but it needs to be clean and it needs to sound like the best version of them. And that's what we're coaching our producers to do in the session.
And then you mentioned how long it takes to produce an audiobook on average. And it used to be that
Right.
because it took so long and the author had to spend so much time producing the actual print and ebook version with editing and going back and rewriting and things like that,
Right.
that it would
Right.
be the ebook and the print book published at the same time. And the audiobook would come
Right.
out 3, 6, 9, 12 months after that initial publication. Is that still the
Right.
case, or has that changed? Because I'm starting to see more audiobooks come out right at the beginning.
Yeah. More are coming out at the beginning. I think you're absolutely right about that trend. There's always been an argument that from a marketing perspective, hitting your audience later with now available on audio is a cool thing. And there's nothing wrong with that idea. A lot of this just has to do with the sort of the process, the journey that the publisher takes the author on. Are they self-publishing? What is the sequence that they imagine is ideal for them and their audience? But more and more, they are coming out simultaneously. I will say, and this is an interesting thing, and for those who have been through the process of working with an editor or a series of editors on a book, reading out loud is one of the best ways to edit, because you miss stuff if you don't read it out loud. I mean, we've been in session with authors doing audio, and they're like, "Oh, did I write that? Boy, is that a cumbersome sentence. Let me make a note to my editor." So in some cases, we're actually seeing the audio lead in terms of production. The release date is, whatever you want to do with that. But the production process, they might do the audio first, then send a note over to their editor. Hey, I found this and this when I was doing the audio, and use it as another pass for the editing process. So that's really turning it on its head, but it can help, because we know that even the best of editors can miss stuff. So.
And I'm thinking part of that time switch has also been the print production delays. It kind of worked out for the better of digital audiobooks to have the print delayed a little bit, so you have more time in editing to be able to produce an audiobook and have it come out at the same time. Before it was, there's just not enough time. We want to get the book out as quickly as possible, so we're going to follow the shortest path for the print book, and then the ebook is kind of just a part of that. And then the audiobook will just have to come later. But now that we're okay, well, we have it edited, we sent the files over, but now we got to wait several weeks for the print to actually make it to us from overseas or from wherever it's being printed, or whatever the delay is or whatever's happening. We have time. Let's get it out. And also, as we talked about earlier, the demand for audiobooks is just so much higher that it's harder to make the audience wait. You're almost missing out on that extra bit of revenue and having that available.
Yeah, there's a sort of a sweet spot with the release of all of this. And so and then this is pointing to the trend you observed, having everything released simultaneously gives your listener a choice in how they want to consume it, as opposed to waiting for audio or not even knowing when it's going to come out or if it's going to come out. So I think that strategically, that trend is definitely we're hanging tight to that trend. We're seeing more and more of that. Yeah.
And for our authors that are worried about losing out on print sales by offering an audiobook sale, I can tell you that as a reader, I almost always buy the print book at the store. And then once it's sat on my shelves for about 1 to 3 months, I'm like, I think the only way I'm going to actually get around to reading this is by listening to it on my commute. So I'm actually purchasing both options. And I think that's true of a lot of people now. People aren't buying just one version. They're actually purchasing multiple different editions of your book so that they can flip out and change how they're reading it, the format they're reading it on based on their convenience. So they might be reading it at home and then they're like, oh, gotta drive to work. Let me switch to audiobook, or I'm traveling. Let me grab my ebook because it's more accessible. And so having those options just honestly might mean that someone's buying your book 2, 3 times instead of just once.
Yeah, I think there's a cross-promotion sort of nature to all of this. Also, for some of our authors, we've suggested that they do an abridged version, which is challenging sometimes. But what it does is it telegraphs what the printed version does. It helps drive sales to the print or the ebook version. So that's another option as well. You can do an abridged audio, and then it cross-pollinates the driving sales.
And can you define abridged just for some of our newer authors?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know if Cliff Notes is the exact way, because it's still the book. It's just edited down to its essence, and it creates a shorter version of audio. Audio is expensive to produce. It's just because it's complicated, and it's audio and it's media, and media production is relatively expensive. So in some cases where there are constraints budgetarily, we'll suggest that, well, you might consider a shorter version of your audio versus the print or ebook.
Let's talk about distribution next, because you mentioned that a little bit
Sure.
earlier, but I'd love to
Sure.
dive into it. Where does an
Yeah.
audiobook need to be? I know for print, everyone thinks Ingram, which is
Right.
where all of the print retailers buy it. And it
Right.
also kind of ships it out to then Barnes and Nobles, bookshop.org, all of those places. And then Amazon, obviously, it's its own
Right.
beast. And we do
Mm-hmm.
see Audible, but I use Libro FM, which is
Yep.
going to be the independent response to Audible. And then I also use
Yeah.
Libby, which is the
Yes.
audiobook ebook version for libraries. So let's dive into all of those
Yeah, yeah,
different
yeah.
options. Let's just do it.
So yeah, you're familiar with the ecosystem. That's beautiful. Simply said, you've got about 70, 80% of the market in the big three, Audible, Amazon, and Apple, right? So most of our authors want to be there so they can link to their Amazon author page, and they're getting the natural ambient traffic that comes with all things Amazon, and Amazon and ACX the ACX is the hub and spoke of those three. So most of our authors will favor doing that. However, as you sort of telegraphed, there are about 50 or 52, I think it is now, other places like Libby, Audiobooks Now, these other audiobooks.com, these other more niche types of your book will land in public and private libraries, school libraries, university libraries. Libraries themselves, public libraries, you can take them out as a digital version. So it's more horizontal in your distribution model. Now, to do that, remember that's going to affect the economics on the big three, because you're going to get a lower royalty rate, or a lower the percentage of sales. The published rate is 40. If you go exclusive on ACX, it's 40% of net sales, and it drops to 25% of net sales if you go non-exclusive, but that enables you to sell wherever and however you want. I'll add that some of our authors like to sell or give away copies direct from their own website or from a link. And we have, because we handle the distribution mechanics for most of our authors and publishers, not always, the publishers often do it themselves, but when we work with an individual author, most of the time we're doing the uploading, we're helping, consulting them on deciding where is ideal for them to distribute. And so by way of facilitating that, these choices just become material to the conversation. There's another point I was going to make, and I think I lost it, but anyway, you'll get me back on track.
Yeah, it sounds like it really depends on what your goals are as an author. Are you looking to make more money? Are you looking to make your book more accessible, more available? Are you looking to engage, educate? And that's going to depend on the individual author. But it's nice to know that they have all those options.
I remember what I was going to say. So we have widgets and tools for an author to sell direct from their website or a link. I telegraphed it, but I don't know that I completed that thought. So there it is. Yeah.
Perfect. That's awesome. I do love the idea of giving away. I find that giving away ebooks, giving away audiobooks is just a great way to seed the book for more review. And the review is only going to help you in the long run, because it's going to educate those retailer algorithms, which is a rant. It's a soapbox I get on all the time on this podcast. So our listeners are used to it.
Yep.
Reviews,
absolutely.
reviews.
Yes. You want those testimonials. It's like any other business. Yeah, the marketing part of all of this is so huge, and it's often underestimated what's required. I've got my book, now what? Kind of a question. And we see that a lot, where I've spent a lot of money to get the book done. Now, I didn't really plan or budget for this marketing endeavor that I now need to engage in. And it's essential, just like any other business endeavor.
What is your answer to that question? I have a book, now what?
Well, you answered part in part, and I'm not an expert in the review ecosystem and the algorithmic side of Amazon. That's not the part of the market, and we're not a marketing company at our core. But it's all things social media. With audiobooks, certainly it's always online. It's link and link and link, and everything's online. You're not buying it in a store, so there's no retail component. So social media is all about it, right? And so the authors that do really well are constantly pushing, and they're getting those reviews. They're linking. They're getting testimonials from readers. They're podcasting. They're appearing on other people's podcasts. In some cases, they'll start their own podcast that often can be structured around the chapters of a book, and then facilitate a discussion about the material or what. There's so many ways. It's a blue sky world with taking a book or an author, their platform, and translating it to a podcastable place. So
It feels so validating every time I have a guest that talks about the importance of marketing after book production. So thank you for that. I very much
that's
appreciate
it. Oh, that's so
it.
important. Oh my God. Yeah.
So going off on a bit of a tangent, but I would love to hear what the difference is between a podcast and an audiobook and some of that blurred line you were talking about with Spotify.
Yeah, no, so fascinating. So I think the blurred line is more about the consumer side and how there's, I mean, it's audio content and it's episodic. So isn't a book chapters, which are arguably episodes anyway. So I think what Dan Eck is saying is just that from a marketing standpoint, Spotify is looking at this as a blurry line. And I'm not exactly sure what he means, but I mean, from a production standpoint, there are distinctions that typically we have thought about these two places because we do both. So the podcast recording process, the development of the show is decidedly different because it's much more improvised in most cases. It's typically a more fluid discussion. Most of our interviews or most of our podcasters rather are doing interview format because they're branded podcasts. They're using podcasts purely for marketing purposes. Although there's a corner of our business that's developing original series, which is more maybe what Spotify's thinking. An original series vis-a-vis a novel. There's a blurred line there too, or film for that matter. You know, these are all just ways of getting content out in a linear way. But for us, the production of them is the biggest distinction. You know, it's a more casual environment with podcasting. The specs for audiobooks are quite stringent. And this is where we have a lot of expertise and a lot of authors that are inexperienced. And you know this, they trip over the technical specs. They try to upload something they recorded on their iPhone and that was not going to fly. So there's a lot of technical audio things that we do to a file formatically. And from a standpoint of the audio itself, the signal, they have to be within a certain range of volume controls and RMS, they call it, and all this technical geeky stuff that I won't get into, but that's what we do to these audio files. You can't try that at home. On the podcast side, you're basically setting things for digital zero, or, you know, you might call a broadcast standard, where you're not dealing with that level of minutia. The room tone doesn't matter. It can be all natural. A lot of times they're not very highly edited. There's all kinds, you know, depending on the range of clients we deal with. Some of them want minutia editing, take out every and every filler word as possible. Others are just let's edit for content, but leave the naturalness of it, which I think is where the trend has been heading. I think the market in general for podcasts is becoming less formalized in terms of production. You know, I come from a traditional media background. I wrote and produced music for radio, TV, and film and commercials. So in that world, it was high production, was highly valued. But for the branded podcaster, to a lesser degree now. We're seeing a little bit of that's less important. What's more important is the marketing side, getting the content out to as many places as you can, producing derivative content, right? Shorts. YouTube has become the hub of podcasting. So shorts are really, really resonating, and this shorter attention span kind of like just spiking your social with teasers that bring people to the longer format, I think is really where the market's been heading. So
Any
hope that's
other
helpful.
trends you're predicting? Anything else that you see happening in the world of audiobooks?
There is a bubbling trend around, and this is going back to quality and probably not so much for the self-read author book, where the sonic experience is less of a thing, but there's a cinematic approach to audio with, you know, 7.1, 5.1 mixing, imaging, and with dramatic audio that met with a colleague in Los Angeles last week. And there's a lot of possibilities with, I mean, you almost call it VR for audio, you know, augmented reality for audio. It's like you can create a lot of imaging with audio using the two sides of people's ears, right? The left and right imaging, and then the depth and sound design and those sorts of things. More and more, I think, may find their way into some of the audiobooks where a dramatic effect is called for, a more cinematic, immersive approach. So that could be a thing. It's not really where our market is for the most part, but except for the original podcast series that we have in development. But for audiobooks, it's kind of new, and I don't know whether it's hard to say whether it's really going to be something that's a game changer, because it's expensive to do. You've got to be a major big five publisher and be able to put a lot of capital into creating, multi-actors and all the sound design and stuff that goes into the production of those. It's like filmmaking. So,
But it's kind of cool to think that that might be something that we see more and more of in the space. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah, theater of the mind. Yes.
And David, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us all these insights. I would love if you could share how our listeners and watchers can learn more about Audivita, getting in touch, and learning more from you.
Well, simply put, we are audivita.com, AUDIVITA. You can see it behind me. Connect your voice to the world. I've got an amazing team. I've got to say, the company started with me alone. That's how I built this company. But now I've got two amazing teams on the podcast and audiobook side. So that's what I like to talk about most, not me, and not, they're the ones bringing the value to market. You can reach us through the website. You can email me if you like at dwolf, DWOLF, like the animal, at audivita.com. And thanks for asking about that.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. And listeners, watchers, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and share it with anyone else that might be interested. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast. To reach us and learn about our many services, visit smithpublicity.com or send us an email to info@smithpublicity.com.